The Illuminati have returned. The automatons have never been closer to Super Earth. The mystery of the gloom has only grown bigger over these past few months, and the DSS has been deactivated and stranded above an automaton planet. Freedom and democracy are in a power like never before. However, how were democracy and freedom in a power before? Dumb question, I know, considering what's going on. But if we don't know our history, then how could we ever have a chance at saving our future? So here's a deep dive into the lore of the Helldivers universe. From pre-Super Earth to pre-Galactic War to the first Galactic War and all of its undemocratic factions to the downtime between the two wars, as well as what managed democracy and Super Earth's command structure is. Before we start, I'd like to say that most of this stuff, especially the stuff pre-First Galactic War, is mostly fan theories, so basically nothing is confirmed. But hey, isn't that what lore is about? Anyways, let's start with. The only evidence we have of anything happening pre-Super Earth is this map. Released by the official Helldivers Twitter or Discord, I'm not sure. And oh boy, does this give a lot about the times, even pre-Super Earth. If you look at these black and yellow areas, they say Last Great War Wasteland. Last Great War. Super Earth united from war. Let me explain. So I'd say around 40 to 60 years after World War II, Earth had a nuclear war. I don't know the two sides of the war, but let's say America and China, since they seem to be the most unharmed after the last Great War. Now look at this map again. Look at Sweden. More specifically at Stockholm. Prosperity City. All other cities are named Mega City 1, 2, 3, 7, not Prosperity City. Now out of universe, Arrowhead is based in Stockholm, Sweden, so of course they'd make the main city of Super Earth the city they are based on. But in universe, we don't have one, like at all. So the reason I and the community can come up with is that in order to end the Great War, after the loss of Canada, Ukraine, part of Greenland and Russia, and the UK, all public officials went to Stockholm to talk about how to end it, and came up with managed democracy is an actual form of democracy, surprisingly. However, from what I've read, it isn't the same as the managed democracy of Helldivers. No, Super Earth's managed democracy is computer assisted. Basically, when citizens become of age to vote, they fill out a personality quiz. Then the quiz gets sent to a computer that automatically votes for you. This form of democracy is perfect and allows the citizens to be free from the burden of choice. It's rigged. Well, I mean, it's not confirmed to be, but the last Super Earth election came down to a 99% votes for one candidate. But that could just be coincidence. In all seriousness, Super Earth is actually fascist, which also makes this game's lore confusing because we see events, especially from the first Helldivers game, by an unreliable narrator, as we don't know which events are true and which aren't. However, general rule of thumb, if the Ministry of Truth says something with very few exceptions, it means the opposite. Speaking of the Ministry of Truth, they are one of the integral parts of Super Earth's hierarchy. It is composed of ministries. I've heard rumors of there being 9 ministries. That's a lot of ministries. However, we only have actual info on 3 of those: the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Science, and the Ministry of Truth. Starting with the Ministry of Defense, which has 3 levels. The top of the food chain is High Command. They are the ones that order us to liberate planets, defend planets, hold planets, and implode planets that may or may not have unforeseen consequences. They also rate our missions once they end, so if you've ever wondered who to blame when you've been in a mission for 30 minutes and barely extracting only to get 1 star, now you know to yell a big ol' "Fuck you, High Command!" Then promptly report yourself to your democracy officer. Trust me, they'll understand. The second in line is actually us, the Helldiver Corps. Our job is to deploy behind enemy lines and take out key targets in order to assist in the liberation of planets. That's why you never see Sith forces. It's because while they're fighting in the front lines, we're behind enemy lines, assisting them by decreasing reinforcement, killing bigger threats, and nuking key enemy targets. You don't need more info about the Helldiver Corps, you already know them because you are them. The final part of the Ministry of Defense is the aforementioned Sith, which are the main fighting force. They are at the front lines, holding the enemies back, and we help them hold the enemies back by sabotaging key areas. They basically act as the basic soldiers in the war against tyranny. There are many types of Swiss units, which I won't be making a video on in the future, since I ain't interested in the ICAF. If you do care, watch this video by Nate's Gamebox after finishing this video. The next ministry is the Ministry of Science. They are the ones who develop the bulk of our weapons and stratagems. That isn't the only thing they do though. They also play a large part in the war. They developed the TCS, developed the dark fluid we used to destroy Meridia, created the now destroyed Terminid Research Preserve, and probably a lot of other stuff that I just forgot about at the current moment because they played a massive part in the war effort so far. They used to not be located in a singular place, being on different planets depending on what they were working on. Now the bulk of this ministry is set up in the Center of Science on Fenrir 3. Which has already confirmed that the Meridia Singularity isn't a black hole, it's a wormhole, which is something that I was sent to re-education for saying, shout out to everyone who gets the reference. Overall, they have actually contributed to the war effort, and overall I don't have anything treasonous to say about them. The Ministry of Truth though, that's a different story. They are in charge of giving the citizens of Super Earth the Helldivers advertisements and also giving them the reliable information of what's going on in the war and just in general of what's going on in the world. Think of the news on the Super Destroyer TV screen, but just for every citizen. Now here's where the treason begins. They don't really say anything that's true, and if they do it's very rare. They are in charge of giving the citizens propaganda to keep them in line, and keep them against the enemies of Super Earth, which is where they lie the most. You'll see when we get there. These are the main and most well-known ministries, however there are, as I said, about 9 ministries. So here are all the ministries that I know of. Ministry of Expansion, acquires planets for Super Earth during peaceful times. Ministry of Humanity, cares or at least pretends to care about the citizens of Super Earth and on all its planets. Ministry of Economy, keeps the Super Earth economy as capitalistic as possible. And the Ministry of Heroic Sacrifice Affairs, which sends the Helldivers families their helmet, arm or body after their death. That's it in terms of the Super Earth hierarchy and its political system, but this doesn't lead to the start of the First Galactic War, so let's begin The main thing that led us to the first Helldivers game is the discovery of FTL travel. It makes sense that it be discovered after the last Great War, since we were in a war and we couldn't really develop anything that wasn't war related. So let's say about 5 years after the war, we figured out how to make the Arcubi drive, which is a real thing by the way. Well, it doesn't actually exist obviously, but it does exist in theory. And how I understand it is that it works in a way that expands the space behind the object, while also decreasing the space in front of the object, therefore making distances shorter and allowing it to travel insane distances in a very short amount of time, and achieving FTL travel. We haven't figured out how to make this yet, however in the Helldivers universe they made this somehow, and started acquiring planets, starting with Mars and then expanding further. These expansions finish at around 2044 with the start of the war starts off with the bugs. The reason we are at war with the bugs is because when they were discovered by a few innocent colonists, the bugs viciously killed them all. That's when we discovered both the bugs and their vicious nature, and the reason we need to exterminate them. We also discovered why we're actually fighting them. The bug's blood is a new element, which we call 710, which is a super dense substance that can be used as fuel for the entirety of Super Earth and all of its planets. Another point of debate is the bug's sentience. The Ministry of Truth highlights them as mindless animals, killing all of our citizens for their own survival and hatred of democracy. Such a big hatred of democracy in fact that when quote democratic activities occur, the bugs quote again sense them and start attacking. Now I don't know if the bugs are attracted to democratic activities, but what I do know for pretty much a certain fact is that the Terminids are not mindless. When we discovered the bugs, in fact they were peaceful to us, until one died and we discovered that they are made of fuel, which is when we started attacking them in order to use them as fuel. Then we have the second faction, the Illuminate, pretended to be a peaceful faction for us, which we accepted since we love peace and democracy, until we discovered that they had weapons of mass destruction. We knew that they used their WMDs to destroy us and our way of life, so we had to preemptively push them out of the galaxy, is what the Ministry of Truth told you, and we know what to do when the Ministry of Truth tells us something. The Illuminate did not have WMDs. If they did, they'd use them. And before you say they didn't have a reason, let me give you one. pretty compelling, isn't it? But okay, if the Illuminati did not have WMDs, why did Super Earth attack them? Let's skip 100 years for a moment and look at the current Illuminati units, specifically the Overseer. Let's look at their weaponry. First at the basic Overseer, then at the Flying Overseer. Now let's look at the Purifier. Then the Scorcher. You see the similarities, right? We wanted to steal their tech, which makes sense since the Illuminati are far more advanced than us. So stealing their tech would bring us closer to their level. Another thing I'd like to say is that the Illuminati weren't a militaristic faction. We know this because while the Illuminati did use a lot of shields, they had very little armor, often just one piece of armor on the chest area and no headgear. And also they didn't really have long range weapons. The only kind of weapon they have is a staff. The only times they had long range weapons is the tribots, which were far weaker than the current variants, and the hunter, which didn't actually use any weapons, but used nanobots to kill people from a long range. So we actually started the war with a society that had never been in a war, and even then we still struggled. Jesus Christ, am I scared for our future versus the Illuminati. The final faction are the cyborgs. They abandoned their democratic values and started tinkering with the bodies, removing their human parts and replacing them with machine, becoming disgusting half-breeds between man and machine. At their worst, they were terrorists that bombed our buildings and destroyed our citizens, or kidnapped them and forced them into their regime. Now that I think of it, they're like the modern day Illuminati. Anyway, while yes, they did become cyborgs by themselves, they did it for a good reason. The cyborgs came from Cyberstan, but that isn't exactly where they came from. They originally were Super Earth citizens that were placed on Cyberstan to mine. However, Cyberstan's environment was cold and harsh, so the miners needed to improvise, and started using part of the materials on Cyberstan to augment themselves and make mining easier. And slowly they started abandoning Super Earth beliefs of managed democracy and started embracing a form of communism. Managed communism or something, I don't fucking know. Their change in beliefs doesn't seem to have any reasoning that we can pinpoint. However, it can't be easily assumed that they felt abandoned by Super Earth, so they decided to abandon it by themselves. And now the bombings have two possibilities. A. Super Earth caused them, framed the bots and waged war with them. B. The cyborgs caused them, but they only caused very few deaths, leading to Super Earth exaggerating the bombings and then waging war with them. Personally, I see option 1 being the correct one here, as the cyborgs bombing Super Earth building doesn't seem in character for them at this stage. Now yes, if anyone was to have a hatred for Super Earth before the first Galactic War, it would be the cyborgs. However, I don't see their level of hatred being at that point yet. I say yet because now all the factions would happily bomb planets during the Second Galactic War. However, we'll talk about that later. Back to the Borgs, I do think that they were framed with causing the bombings. However, I can see arguments for both sides being true. So that's all the factions. Now let's talk about what we know about the First Galactic War. Not much, I'm afraid. You see, the difference between the first game and the second game is that while the second game is story based and can be influenced by player actions, the first one isn't that. They are essentially 30-day mini-wars that end with either the destruction of Super Earth or the destruction of our enemies. For example, the DSS, Meridia, the Vanguard bot fleet and stuff like that couldn't exist in the first game because it wasn't story-based. So we really have no idea how the first war went down. Well, no idea is a bit of an exaggeration. We have some small bits and pieces from the second game that tell us about major events of the First Galactic War. So let me tell you the breadcrumbs, if you can even call them that, about what we know about the First Galactic War. First of all, we know that a somewhat major conflict occurred on Nublario 1. We also know that that's when one of the original Viper commandos, Jackal 6, fought a Terminid brood with, quote, a machine gun, a pocket knife, impressive, and orbital laser strikes. Oh come on, I could do that. The second thing we know of is the Battle of Liberty Peak. It's related to the bugs, however we don't have much of an idea as to what planet it takes place in. All we know is that it is a part of a Super Earth celebration, All Heroes Eve, which is either Thanksgiving or Easter. Maybe Halloween since it involves adults dressing up, but I'm not sure about that. The final thing we know of is something that I mentioned in my previous video. X-45 had a lab that housed concepts for an interplanetary battle station inside of it. However, before the battle station could even enter the idea of being built, X-45 was maybe attacked. I don't know why I mentioned this in my DSS video, it literally isn't stated anywhere. However, what is stated is that the X-45 had an increased level of radiation, leaving it inaccessible for 100 plus years, until a few months ago where blah blah blah. Go watch my DSS video if you want more info on this topic. So that's all we know about what happened during the First Galactic War. Emphasis on during, because we know what happened once it ended and how it ended for all the factions. Starting with the bugs, their defeat and the defeat of all factions really, was on their home planet, which for the bugs was Kepler Prime. After their defeat, most of the bugs were killed off, and when I tell you that the rest wish they were killed off, I am not lying, because the rest were kept in farms and genetically mutated in order to produce more and more E710 for Super Earth. In terms of the Illuminate, they were similarly executed on their home planet of Squabai, which is surprisingly easy to say, and were forced to move out of the galaxy and give us their equipment, which included the dark fluid, which Meridia vets like myself know very well what it can do. Finally, the cyborgs faced true justice on Cyberstan. After the Adjustment Day, they were de-weaponized and forced into democratic values, with military being kept on Cyberstan for a good 5 to 10 years to ensure the cyborgs' cooperation and re-involvement into our way of life. So all in all, they got off pretty easy. And after the First Galactic War, the galaxy uttered in an era of peace, liberty and prosperity. For Super Earth, that is. Yeah, the other factions not so much. Let's talk about the factions' evolutions during. Starting with the bugs, their evolution into the Terminids is already somewhat explained in their ending. They were genetically mutated to produce more E710 with an asterisk I'll talk about a bit later. That's why there are bile bugs now. They produce a lot of E710. I mean, just look at that pop. It's so satisfying. And even the bugs that aren't bile bugs, they still have very squishy beaks that could give us a good amount of fuel. The only bugs that don't follow these rules are the Stalkers and the Impalers. Shriekers don't count because they aren't intentional, they were created by the TSS. The Stalkers and the Impalers are the Asterix I wanted to talk about. Both had variants in the first game that, while still threatening, ask my friend, weren't quite as powerful as the current variants. So they obviously were tinkered with. But how? Since they don't seem to produce much more E710 than their pre-liberated variants. Well, it's because of their gimmicks. The Stalker can go invisible, and while it could also go invisible in Helldivers 1, it wasn't as strong of an invisibility. So the community's idea is that the Ministry of Science wanted to create invisibility suits. So they tinkered with the closest thing to invisibility they had available, the Stalker. And while they not only didn't achieve that, they also made their invisibility even more effective. Great job, guys. The Impaler is even less squishier than the Stalker. But they obviously tinkered since they are, you know, a little bigger than before. So why would they do this? Well, they could have used them for mining. I mean, it does make sense, it would pass all the rock and stone in the ground and go straight to all the valuable minerals. So they made them bigger. But they unfortunately couldn't tame them. So task failed again. Great job, lads. C for effort. See, as in continuing with the cyborgs, they didn't really evolve into the automatons. Instead, we have reasonable evidence to believe that they made the automatons. The Helldivers 1 Twitter account posted a lot of tweets in binary, then proceeded to delete them. But since you can still view deleted tweets if there is a link for them you can use, someone translated these messages and they say, "We, the collective from Cyberstan, unanimously assert our independence from Super Earth. You have the right to defend our home from the brainwashed Helldivers. Our children, the automaton, will not suffer as we have under the oppression of Super Earth." Other than this being treasonous garbage, this shows us that the cyborgs, which are certainly behind this message, view the automatons as their children. Now, this obviously isn't literal, since the cyborgs still have the reproductive organs as humans, so if they had an actual child, it'd still be human. They'd probably mutilate and give mechanical limbs. No, I think they mean that the automatons are their creations, which makes sense. The cyborgs would obviously want to fight back against Super Earth, given this message, but they knew they'd lose, since what happened during the previous war. So they built a massive army, specifically designed for war, and have a better chance of beating Super Earth. And I mean, they are one sector away from Super Earth, and have converted Cyberstan into a mega bot factory. So I'd say the automatons did their job well. The final and possibly most interesting one is the Illuminate. They, as stated before, were a peaceful race that wasn't ready for war, and after their defeat from Super Earth, they got bitter and started preparing for war, and I believe that we have a lot of evidence to show for that. For starters, they use a lot more machinery to fight us. They did have machines in the first Galactic War, but now they have even more machines, like 2 out of 4 Illuminate units are machines. So we can definitely assume that they made these so that they wouldn't have to sacrifice as many units to win the war. Another piece of evidence for that is their chaff. The voteless are obviously super citizens that are brainwashed in order to fight us, while in the first Galactic War their chaff was just their regular citizens with a bit of armor, again saving them a lot of casualties, while also causing a lot of casualties for Super Earth, so it's a win-win for them. Which again really highlights how smart the Illuminate are. And the final piece of the puzzle that shows us how the Illuminate are well prepared to fight us this time is a small detail on the Overseer. Flashback to Helldivers 1 Illuminates, you can pretty obviously see that they had 4 arms. Flash forward to current day Illuminate, none of the units have 4 arms. For most of these it makes sense why. However, for the Overseer, why doesn't it have 4 arms? Could it be that it isn't an actual Illuminate? No, in fact we can see that it hides the rest of its arms. Take a gander at its stomach. Why is it so weirdly shaped? Could it be that the Illuminates are fat? Not really, as most of the Illuminates in Helldivers 1 were pretty skinny. No, that's the rest of its arms, hidden away and protected by armor, so they even managed to cover up their biggest weak spots. Now before you say that when you shoot off their armor you don't see any arms, they're behind the black suit that the Illuminates are wearing, similar to the Helldivers, who have a black suit under their armor. The Illuminate do the same thing to cover their bodies. Now another question is, why are the Illuminate attacking Super Earth colonies? Where to have more voteless, of course. Since they don't have an endless supply of humans they can turn into squids, they are going to kidnap all of our citizens, so they have enough for when the main fleet arrives. How do I know that this isn't their main fleet? First of all, they only have 5 units, compared to the other factions that have 10 plus units. And 2, due to the patch notes and at the time of writing this, recent major order proving that both a black hole is a wormhole and that the Illuminate came out of the wormhole. So I suspect when the Illuminate have kidnapped enough of our citizens, aka when Arrowhead is finished with more powerful units, the Illuminate will come out of the wormhole with their home planet, or maybe they convert it into a Illuminate planet, and then start working like a regular faction. So that's it for everything pre-Second Galactic War. Now let's not get into the Second Galactic War. Yeah, you heard me right, I will not be getting into the Second Galactic War for 2 reasons. 1, this video is already way too long, and 2, that only shit deserves its own video, since we literally know everything that has happened and it'll be like a recap of what has happened so far in it. However, what I can promise is a release date for the video, which is February 8th, 2025. Why? No reason, it just seems like a very good date to release that video, so I can get it out as soon as possible while still giving myself time to make it. So, that's it for this video. As stated previously, once this video goes live I will immediately start production on the Second Galactic War video. However, I don't know if it will be the next video. That will depend on the amount of time it takes for me to actually make the Second Galactic War video. So until that video comes out, continue spreading managed democracy, and remember to drink water, eat an apple, talk to your family and subscribe so I can see you in the next one.